So the Dogfighter, the latest re-release from Yokomo, what can I tell you about it? I'll try and keep this brief. I tend to waffle on for an inordinate amount of time, so I'm going to try and keep this brief. This is the second re-release from Yokomo, following on from the Super Dogfighter, also known as the YZ-834B, that came out in December of last year. Yokomo themselves said that the whole reason for bringing back the 870C was constantly being nagged by fans and enthusiasts. You know, when are you going to re-release one of your buggies? When are you going to re-release one of your buggies? And finally, they relented and brought out the 870C. And that was a massive success. Certainly in Japan, it was hugely popular and very difficult to get hold of when it first came out. And I think even Yokomo was surprised at just how well it sold. So they want to capitalize on that, and there's been enough people asking for it. So hence we have the first, well, there's a bit of a debate about that. I believe Yokomo, Kyosho with the Progress, and I think Hirobo all claim to be the first to produce a 110 scale electric four-wheel drive buggy. This, the 834B Dogfighter, came out in 1983 along with those, I can't remember what the Hirobo buggy was called, but the Kyosho brought out their Progress. So I guess it's anybody's guess who was actually first to bring it to market. Muddying the water somewhat is the fact that outside of Japan, I don't believe this was sold as the Yokomo. It was under a different brand name, possibly even under different model names. I mean, I grew up in England, and I never saw one of these in the flesh, as it were, back in the day. It wasn't really until the Super Dogfighter much later that I came across Yokomos. So, the 834B. Let's talk about the elephant in the room first, the price. So this, in Japan at least, is, as near as it makes no difference, exactly the same price as the previous 870C release. And certainly on the bench, side by side, I would have to say that I feel that the Super Dogfighter, the 870C, is better value for money. It's got more alloy parts, cast alloy parts, more FRP, GRP, and just overall it looks to be a more premium product. Before the pricing for this buggy was announced, a lot of people speculated it would be cheaper, given that it's more plastic, uses 2 less dampers. This is monoshock setup front and rear. So I think some people were a bit surprised when the SMRP came out to be exactly the same as the 870C. In all fairness, I think part of the reason this is so expensive is simply that Yokomo wanted to release it just as it was back in the day. And by that I mean back in the day it came semi-assembled. You had to finish a few things off, but it was already pre-built, and that's obviously going to add to the cost. So with this 834B re-release, Yokomo opted to present it exactly as it would have been back in 1983, and that's kind of added somewhat to the cost. It is an expensive buggy, RC buggy to be sure, and hopefully prices will drop down at some point, but I wouldn't really hold my breath. But yeah, if you're in the market and you can't decide between the 870C and the 834B, strictly on value for money, I would lean towards the 870C, to be honest. Another thing is, you don't get, I was looking forward to being able to build this just for this nostalgic value, but coming semi-assembled, well, truth to be told, I ended up stripping it down just out of curiosity, and also because I wanted to check a few things. But if you enjoy building, especially quirky old school buggies, then having something that's pre-assembled kind of detracts a little bit. So like I said, when you open the box, it's all pretty much pre-built. You get an unpainted, uncut body that you need to do yourself. And I'll talk about the body in a little while. Also included in the box are a few bits and pieces, but not much really. So you get a very basic instruction manual. I would imagine that the ones outside of Japan come in English. It's really just steps necessary to get yourself running. So glue the tires, put oil in the shocks, install the motor. Installing the motor is a lot more involved than this tiny diagram would lead you to believe. Again, I'll get onto that in a moment. Installing electronics. the rear wing. I should point out that this rear wing is not the kit one. This is actually, pretty sure this is PR Racing ring. The kit one, it's a little bit, I wouldn't say it's flimsy, but it's not as strong as this one, and it has no cut lines on it whatsoever. It's basically just free cut. You just trim it to however you want. No dimples and stuff to mark out where you need to drill holes. So I ended up just going with the PR Racing wing instead. On the back, apologies if this is very loud, you've got a exploded diagram with a list of all the parts and quantities, which doesn't really make much sense because it's already pre-built. So moving on, you get a QR code that will take you to a, I believe it's unlisted video on Yokomo's YouTube channel, although you can actually access this from the Yokomo homepage, and it's basically a short instructional video on how to complete the steps necessary. You actually have to disassemble quite a bit of the buggy. I'll pop the body off. Installing the motor is not as straightforward as it seems, mainly because the bottom motor plate screw, I'm not sure if the camera's picking this up, is situated exactly in line with the chassis. So in order to make motor installation a little easier, you need to remove this top brace, chain guide, you need to remove the battery holder, and then you need to go ahead and loosen up the gearbox so that you can lift it away from the chassis to get access to this lower screw. Once you install the motor, it comes with a 17 tooth pinion, but the gears are all 32 pitch gears. Incidentally, I had a look in the gearbox. It's all very well greased from the factory using black grease, so if that's something that concerns you, don't worry, it's properly greased. But it is all 32 pitch gears. The rear diff is a gear diff. I think it's bespoke to this chassis because obviously the outer gears are 32 pitch as well. It makes sourcing pinions and stuff a little tricky. I believe this is different to the original, but I'm not sure if the camera's going to pick that up. There was actually a little window cut out with a little clear polycarbonate cover on it that allows you to check the backlash. Although with the included 17 tooth pinion, you basically install the pinion and then push the motor mount all the way to the back and tighten it up, and that'll give you perfect backlash gear mesh with the 17 tooth pinion. What else do you get? You get a large exploded diagram of all the parts, and then underneath, at least on the Japanese market, you get a complete list of part numbers and prices. Parts are coming, but at the moment they're not available. I'd imagine in the next month or so you would start to see parts become available, so certainly for the next month try to avoid breaking anything on this. And here you can also see the arrangement of the gears and the gearbox and the rear diff, which includes a gasket. It's pretty much a standard modern day diff. I'd imagine the only difference is this outer gear pitch. I didn't go as far as dismantling the diff, so I can't tell you what is inside, but just going on feel, it's probably some very thick grease, possibly oil, I'm not sure. And then finally you get a set of stickers, decals, which, as you probably noticed, are the exact same ones that come with the Super Dog Fighter. In fact, it even says Super Dog Fighter, and that is it. That is as far as it goes when it comes to decals. So a little bit disappointing when you get to the body because there is nothing. There's window masks and that's it. So you pretty much left to your own devices when it comes to decals for the body. I ended up raiding my decal set, but I'm still looking for something suitable for the rear wing and a few other bits and pieces. The body itself, the quality is really good. It's a product of its time though, so this was what, 1983, so the mold lines aren't great and the cut lines kind of disappear. You got pretty well defined cut lines at the front of the body, but once you get to the back, it's like it's there's no cut lines. Initially, I cut it like most people do, straight across here, leaving this center section intact. But one problem you have is getting the body on and off is a right faff. And with this center section in, you can't bend it outwards like this. And what happens is these cantilevers, these bars, really scratch against the body, and basically once you've painted it, unless you've got a lot of protective tape on there, you just really damage the body really quickly. So I ended up, just to make it easier to get the body on and off, cutting this away. It would help with motor cooling as well, but it does make it a lot easier to get the body on and off the chassis. And then what's left over after you've finished construction, finished assembly, is a set of clips that basically just clip into the battery tray and allow you to run shorty lipo. I'll be running NIM packs, old school, simply because I plan to enter a race and you're not allowed to use shorty lipo, so I'll be using old school NIM packs. And a few servo horns, and that's about it. So putting it together doesn't take very long at all. Straightforward. I will say, be careful of, what can I tell you? Trying to keep this as brief as possible. When it comes to the motor, be careful of orientation, mainly because there's not a lot of clearance between the top of the motor and the bottom of the body. So if you've got like motor tabs on this side, the body might not sit down properly. In fact, the body doesn't sit down properly at all, mainly because this battery tray and the battery kind of protrudes, pushing the body out. The edge of the servo stay mount also pushes the body out, so it's not ideal. When you install the electronics, like I said, you have to remove this upper brace, the battery tray, in order to install the motor. Full-size servos will fit fine, but if it's over a certain length, I think it was like 27 mil from the mounting bracket to the end of the servo, then you need to use some spacers to push the servo forward. Because as you can see, my Futaba servo is pushed right up against the battery tray. And depending on your servo, the servo mount has got quite thick sides, and so I believe one of my Futabas and one of my Savok servos, the servo wires wouldn't clear the servo mount. With this Futaba servo, was it Futaba S9470, just clears the back of the servo mount. I mean, it's not a big issue. You could just fit your own servo mount or custom one, or you could just Dremel out some of the existing servo mount to get clearance, but it's worth noting. The electronics, there's reasonable amount of space. As you can see, I've got 1060 here. You could probably get something larger in this space. I opted to put the receiver here. It's recommended to actually mount it up on top of the gearbox. I moved it here for two reasons. One, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, I've cut out most of the back of the body, so I didn't really want the receiver being on show. And two, the weight balance left to right, much like the Super Dog Fighter, isn't great. You've got a heavy motor on this side and not a lot to counterbalance on this side, so it tends to lean a little bit to the left or to the right. Well, left is you're looking at in the picture, but right of the chassis. If anybody's got any experience with the Dog Fighter and knows of any way to address that, rather than, aside from the obvious putting some weight on here to counterbalance, I was wondering whether lengthening this turnbuckle will, it's nothing major, it's about what, 2 mil, 3 mil, depending on the weight of the motor, but it is noticeable that it actually sits a little bit lower on this side than this side. Most of my OCD kicking in. What I was going to tell you, the shocks are exactly the same ones that come with the 870C, so they're aeration emulsion shocks, but they don't have a bleed screw, which means building them up properly is a little tricky. The instructional video on the Yokomo's YouTube channel explains how to fill them up, so if you're not sure, just go ahead and check that. It's a 1983 buggy, so when you compare this to what Tamiya had at the time, what did Tamiya have? Grasshopper, frog, SRB chassis. The suspension is pretty good. The front is a little bit on the stiff side and there's not a lot of movement. Very reminiscent of Hot Shot. The rear is too soft, even with this spring, which is quite a stiff spring. It's too soft, and as you can see, I've had to wind the adjuster down quite a bit. Once this has got a battery in, yeah, it tends to sink down at the rear. It isn't designed for big air or big jumps. It's designed for, you know, dirt tracks of the day. So it is what it is. The chassis is interesting. I mean, everyone that's familiar with this, you know, dogfighter, this is nothing new. But for me, my first dogfighter, I find it interesting that the chassis is just one whole piece of plastic. The bumper is integrated into it. Couple of the quirks, again, those familiar with the 834B, this is nothing new, but because the rear arms, trailing arms are plastic and they tend to flex, you have cable ties right here, little cable ties, basically holding the arms in place so that they don't flex and dog bones drop out. I thought that was kind of like a neat, simple solution to, you know, the problem. Gear wise, you've got a set of gears in basically what looks like a block. The gearbox is basically a rectangular block. You've got a set of gears in here that, like I said, they're all 32 pitch. The full bearings, of course, and the shafts are all metal. Central motor, and then you've got a chain drive to the front. You've got a sprocket, and then on each wheel hub you have a one-way bearing, so it's free spinning in one direction but will engage in another. The chain is actually quite beefy. In fact, I'll have to dig it out, but it looks a lot beefier than the chain that comes with the Javelin, your Kyosho Javelin and Optima. It probably might be the same though. But there we go. The only other thing I would mention is the wheels are about a little bit, I haven't measured them, but about 42 mil. They're the same size as the Kyosho Tomahawk Scorpion Beetle rear wheels, so you could actually use the rear tires from that buggy on all four corners. The 870C Super Dogfighter wheels will fit, but you end up with a small gap, so the actual diameter of the hole in the center of the 870C wheels is larger than the diameter of these, so you end up with a small gap all the way around. It shouldn't be a problem since you've got two screws and then you've got the actual square hub holding everything in place, but until aftermarket wheels or indeed Yokomo decide to release different colored wheels, you're pretty much stuck with these wheels and tires. I may test the 870C wheels with carpet spec tires on just to see how well it runs, but I've seen videos of this running on indoor carpet and it does. I mean, I know it's not supposed to be running indoor carpet, but it does surprisingly well. The tires are quite soft and although it's going to be a balance. I should take a step back and say I do plan to run this indoor carpet at some point. So given that there's no adjustment for camber or anything related to suspension geometry aside from towing, grip rolling is going to be, traction rolling is going to be something that needs to be carefully managed. So you don't want tires that have got too much grip because you're just going to roll it in the corners. So there we go. That's the 834B. I'll shut up now. Work is busy at the moment, so it might be a while before I can get out and do a running video with this, but one is in the works and will be coming. So thank you for watching. My name is David. This has been Kai CDRC. I'll catch you in the next one.